Hi, welcome to the Wellbeing Show. Might look like I'm a rabbit caught in the headlights. That's because I'm trying to figure out how to pronounce a word which this evening's guest has just thrown at me at the last minute. It's like I'm an expert on pronouncing words, and I'm not. So I'm going to go on, do what we all do, is Google it and find out, and listen to the word on Google. It'll tell me how to say it, but it's a complicated medical word. So we might have a lot of those tongue twisters going on this evening by the looks of it. Anyway, welcome to the Wellbeing Show. It's great. Second in the new season. It's wonderful to be back live. It's been a strange period of time, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But just to encourage you, if you're listening live, to drop in comments, Facebook or YouTube, or indeed on my WhatsApp, which is 07506 319 745. Drop me a message if you're doing it from outside the UK. Get rid of the first 0 and add a plus and a 4 and a 4, and then that'll come through to me. So it'd be lovely to hear from you. And my guest this evening is Kate Horne, who's an all singing, all dancing, amazing person, who's come on to tell us about some of her life, but also about a really important issue. It's close to my heart because my son has ADHD, but her late diagnosis of ADHD and the experience of having the condition without the diagnosis, then getting the diagnosis, and then what it's like post-diagnosis and what sort of changes that it made, which were quite dramatic in Kate's life. With that, I'm going to say hello, Kate. Welcome to the Wellbeing Show. It's lovely to have you.
Hello, thank you for having me and talking about this subject, which this is the first time I've been talking about it openly, apart from my article. So
yeah, is it really?
Yeah.
All right, we'll take a minute. Just relax. It could be quite anxiety provoking for most people, I think.
Well, I think it's just the hardest thing for someone with ADHD to talk, and you're constantly self-censoring, oversharing, and so I just I'm monitoring myself.
Good to hear. It is one of those things about there's all these things. It's noradrenaline. Okay, that's what it is. It's another word for noradrenaline, which I do know what that is, Kate. So that was the word I was Googling, was the one that Kate gave me. She said, how do you say this word? And I was like going, all right, I'll sort that out.
Well, that was the word. It's a difficult word to say. That it was explained to me what ADHD, what was happening in an ADHD brain when I was diagnosed. It was explaining that how an ADHD brain is different from a neurotypical brain, because the ability for the brain to the transport of these chemicals, the chemical we just said, these chemicals which help to regulate your concentration and your responses to literally everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't work in don't function in the same way as a neurotypical brain. So that helped me. I think that really helped me to try and understand a lot more about it. It really affects every aspect of your life, your day, your responses, your sensory responses to everything. How you absorb everything is different with ADHD.
Yeah, and it's an actual difference that is not mediated by motivation or anything like that. It's not a psychological difference, it's a biological issue, which is the point about highlighting the neurotransmitter element of it. So information is not transmitted from one part of the brain to the other. So there are things like problems with what's known as working memory, for example. And working memory is a thing that we're using right now, which when we go to sleep gets processed and gets broken down into its constituents and parts, and then that becomes memory and experience, which informs. It's also what we call education and learning.
Yeah.
If your working memory is not working, your information can't go from your working memory to the long-term memory. You can't learn anything, and this is sort of.
That's a really and I think that's wow, it's really gone to the crux of it very quickly, because but that was, I think that is what I really motivated me to start, to write about it in the first place, because I felt it was when I was first diagnosed, and I don't know if you want to talk about that process or when it
just follow. Don't worry about which direction.
And
we'll get where we go.
Expected later in life, as an old lady, well, after I'd had my first child, soon after I'd had my first child, and I didn't even know what the acronym stood for, ADHD. I was like, when I heard that being said, when I was sitting in front of a psychiatrist who basically I'd gone to see because I'd got overcome into a kind of depression, because it had been undiagnosed for so many years, and I'd found these strategies to deal with it, but I'd never realized what was really going on in my brain. And so I'd been drawn into this depression, and it was a psychiatrist that said, look, I really believe you've got undiagnosed ADHD, and don't worry, because we can deal with that. And it's not something which I'd been told by the GP, by friends and family who wanted to help me, but they weren't versed in what ADHD was, and hadn't seen, and they just thought I had depression, and it was postnatal depression. And if what I presented, if I had been given and taken the medication, antidepressants, I think I would have become even more depressed or suicidal, because they wouldn't have dealt with the root problem, which was,
That's my experience, actually, Kate, is that when you inappropriately give people antidepressants when they've got ADHD, the anxiety and or depression doesn't go away, and people begin to despair and become.
Yeah. And I think that's really why I want to talk about it now. I think there's, I don't know who anybody who's tuning into this, or whether they are, whether a woman, or a young woman, older, or a young man, people who think their children might have it. Every case is, of course, different, but I can just talk about my own experience and why my motivation to really raise so much awareness about it is because I see it, because women have been so overlooked for so many years, because the studies of ADHD have really focused on the hyperactive schoolboy.
People focus on, not the whole gamut of experiences. Exactly, right.
Yeah. It's focused on that, and it's not looked at how it presents itself in girls so much. And actually,
it's also not looked at how it presents itself in most people.
There
are various forms of ADHD, and then ADD, and then blah 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 blah. But you're right. It's particularly in school. It's the hyperactive child that gets the attention, and it's understandable. But they get the attention because they're the badly behaved child.
Yeah, it's like the classic.
The class, right.
I want to say it's not Harry Hill. The other one, Harry Enfield, Kevin. The kind of the naughty boy, and a bit thick, a bit stupid, and doesn't concentrate and is jumping off the walls. And I think because I get that reaction, even I think what I've been very frustrated by is, even by talking about, although the discussions open up so much, and during the pandemic, there was explosion on TikTok, and in Google searches were they're doubling every, and they were giving do I have ADHD was giving do I have COVID a run for its money, during the pandemic. And people were, and yet there was this buzz, and the acronym was flying around social media, but it was so simplified, and it was so kind of I think exaggerated. There was still Penn State, sharing that image of the hyperactive schoolboy, without looking really at the nuance. And there was a lot of people saying, oh, everybody's just got ADHD these days. And I felt really angry by that. I felt really, really, really frustrated by the reaction, not only on social media, but from actually, friends who I think they meant it in a kind way, like, oh yeah, we've all got a bit of, we've all gone a bit crazy in the pandemic, or we're all too absorbed by social media, or zapping between channels, or watching, Netflix while we're texting our friends, and there's constant changing between applications and screens. And while I definitely think this age the modern age, or technology is, can exacerbate symptoms. If you have ADHD, can make it much worse. I think it fails to address by saying that it doesn't. What goes on is actually going on in the brain is different, and I think. I think there's a writer who, a woman who's Emma Mahoney, a journalist, who wrote a brilliant book about ADHD in women called Better Late Than Never. It was being diagnosed later in life than I was, but she talks about it brilliantly, about being pseudo ADHD, how pseudo ADHD, she said, is that people will think, oh, they'll self-diagnose, think, oh, I've got ADHD, or my child's got ADHD, jumping between screens. But the difference is when I talk to people who don't have it, or I say to my husband, who can, scroll through things, flit around his attention. And then when he's drawn, he has to come out of going down, the scrolling rabbit hole. He has to do a tax return, or he has to mend the garden fence. He can come out, he can pull himself out of doing all of that. I think, right, I've got to get on with that. And what happens in the ADHD brain is, and we laugh, I can laugh about this, but it's not funny. It's not funny all the time, because this is literally most moments of your life that you get lost in your attention absorbed in something, and you're lost in that, and it's almost like you're in, I don't know, you're in fifth gear enjoying something, or having this hit of excitement and dopamine, and then you can't shift gears back into gear one of doing something really mundane and monotonous. And I can articulate that now, because I've been diagnosed and I can understand my brain, and I've been empowered with that knowledge. And I can understand, oh, that's why I need to break up my day by doing different things. And I need to use these strategies, which will empower me to be able to work in the right way and all that. But when I didn't know that for so many years, and as a child, I was left every time my parents, I've seen, was told in class or at home, quickly, get back, now you need to do this, or you do need to do the homework. You're so lazy. And it was berating voice that would come from the outside, or criticism from teachers and parents. And then what was worse is I was left with this inner berating voice. You stupid cat. And it was, you stupid cow, you stupid cow, you stupid cow. It was really attacking me, And I know, don't get me wrong, it's like everybody, yeah, we all have a bit of that. Of course people have, like, come on, getting motivation to do something bloody boring is hard for anybody. But I think that what happens in brain, a neuroatypical brain, or with ADHD, is that you're left with that feeling, and it can fester, and you'll fester alone, and it can draw you into, we could provoke anxiety or depression if you don't have strategies in place to get yourself out of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's also, I think it's interesting thinking about those types of experiences when one is younger and personality is very much forming. And what's the experience of having that level of negativity and of repetitive from different sources? So you begin to believe it, wouldn't you? You
begin to believe it. It's perpetuated it's just compounded by every. So I mean, I was looking at how it affects children. So by why I was arguing, or I was trying to put across my case with a teacher about, a teacher who was very reticent about naming, labeling children, and especially about this anxiety around, I think, medicating children, big pharma, and like the scary for like, what we're doing to our children if we give them this ADHD medication, which we'll come back to, I'm sure, because that is not without, I'm not criticizing anybody. I understand people's reservations about medication.
I've got strong opinions that might criticize people. So I'll do that for you.
Say that, and that was their argument in schools for saying, oh no, we can't do it. We're going to wait a lot. We don't want to do anything in primary school. Well, actually, by the age of 10. It's been estimated that a child with undiagnosed ADHD will have received 20,000 more negative messages.
Absolutely, related to that. I know
that is like really shocking. And actually, that is what I did feel myself. I whether I was going, whether at school and I was daydreaming and I couldn't, when I was asked a question, I couldn't respond immediately to it, and I'd be thinking, I would be told daydreaming, slapdash, all those things that are thrown at you. It's like, slapdash, distracting, you're distracted, you're clumsy, and I was inarticulate, even though I knew I had inside, I really believed that I was stupid.
There's also another thing, and this is specific to education and children, which is because the working memory, the transfer of information from working memory to long-term memory is not happening. You're not learning. By the time you get to 10, there's 5 years at least of knowledge that you've only fractionally taken on board. And then you might get then diagnosed, you might get then medication, which we are going to talk about because I think it's really important. But then there's an expectation that other 5 years of lost time didn't happen. Of course, our education system is based upon the notion that children learn progressively over time. If you take away 5 years of early learning, what the hell do you think is going to happen to that child? What sort of ridiculous nonsense is that, to then think, so we've now sorted the problem out and given you the medication, you're now going to fly, aren't you? Of course you're not going to fly. And
I think that's what really, and that's why I feel so passionate about. I look back at the schoolgirl me, I think back to it, and I try not to be, I feel incredibly fortunate because, God, I'm one of the fortunate ones that has had a diagnosis, and I have the privilege of the diagnosis, and I know that there's thousands of people, millions waiting on these waiting lists, or not even aware that there is such a thing, in other countries in the world where it's just absolute, it's not talked about at all. And I think, but I do, and I look at my, children, I look at children, I can see myself in that, 10-year-old now, and I think these girls particularly, and I think back to when I was asked a question, I just couldn't get my head around whether, to absorb, whether the sun went around the earth went around the sun.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
I couldn't process. And so I was just left feeling stupid. And then what happened, and I'm sure it happens the case with many other children, because it's not, what I should say on this point is, at this point is, it's not at all, has no correlation with IQ, right, or being academic, right? You can be incredibly, I was told some ways, and some aspects I could be very bright, or very, I could absorb certain information, but there's other things that I couldn't, which also was because it is a topsy-turvy kind of condition. It didn't, how can you absorb this information and yet you can't absorb that? And it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me, and it didn't make sense to, so it was because I didn't understand why I was doing well at one subject, but I couldn't engage with another subject. It was really hard to get your head around. I think that's why it is so hard for teachers. There's no module in school. There's no module for teachers when they, the teaching stuff too, as far as I know, I'm speaking to many teaching, it might be in some schools, but in the average school, or the average teacher does not have a model in this, and in neurodiversity.
I can say confidently, this is in my professional practice. What my professional practice does unusually is we provide a range of services, and we do a lot of work with schools. And I would say that the majority of the work I do professionally with schools is training them in how to deal with somebody with ADHD. That's the vast majority of it.
And that is, and doctors, but also the team.
That child often comes with about 5 different diagnoses attached to them. They'll have been diagnosed with personality disorders, mental health problems, blah, 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 all sorts of nonsense. Before finally somebody said, no, it's ADHD, here's the medication. They begin to get it. And the school is lost. They don't know what they're doing.
No, they don't, and neither do GPs. It's like, I was thinking, and that's not by the fault. It's just the way, the nature. There isn't, again, that there's not a day even that's given, devoted to really kind of like looking at this, and that's why I think when I went to, especially when GPs or anybody dealing with women coming to them, after having given birth, and saying, displaying symptoms of postnatal depression, just a few questions of like, did you feel like this before? Is it exacerbated? I would have answered, yeah, I've always felt for bloody crazy, and now I just feel more, because somebody's what happens often to women, and that's why women are often diagnosed. It's very sad to say, but they are. It's when then there's a breakdown.
Yes.
They're not. I've asked. I mean, most of the women that I know, have been diagnosed. Sad to say, it's when there has been a rupture. There's been this massive, meltdown or breakdown, however you want to go. And
it's interesting though, because what's interesting for me, and I teased you about this in our phone call. And I said, because when I'm talking to you, I know you told me, but I also know I'm talking to somebody with ADHD. I mean, it's clear as a bell. There's no doubt about it. And I'm like, how was that missed? It's like, seriously? It's like literally you've got flashing lights going off saying ADHD to anybody who's been around it. And I mean that in a very kind-hearted way, because I don't think there's a problem with ADHD. I mean, I think that there are problems that come with it in terms of application to certain types of tasks. Thankfully, we've got ways of overcoming that. Yeah. But neurodiversity,
we've got ways of overcoming. If I think that absolutely. I think that there are. I look at it now because I have those. I have strategies, but I would. So after the diagnosis. And looking into it, and in cognitive behavioral therapy, which you can tell people about, but definitely helping to see myself in a more positive light, and talking therapy, going through that, talking therapies, and putting in place strategies with time management, breaking up my day so that I regulate myself, and I can fly, and I can do work really well. I think. And that's
it's annoyingly and frustratingly for me, it's one of the more treatable issues that people have. It actually is. We've got a great set of resources for people to help them overcome the barriers that are created by having ADHD, and it's actually quite successful. And it's really frustrating when I keep hearing that people have not been diagnosed and not been given the training through CBT, not been given the medication. Let's come back to the medication, and particularly with children, because I think it's a really significant issue. And I want to ask you, as somebody with experience as a human being of this, I feel very strongly that these medications should be made available from the earliest possible opportunity. We should be diagnosing from the moment a kid walks in school. We should be looking at this issue because it's so prevalent, and offering those children medication, supporting their parents and understanding it from the earliest moment. And actually, I feel so strongly about it that I think that any teaching professional that opposes it should face disciplinary action. I'm very angry about it. That's how strongly I feel about it. That it should be 100% clear, because as a class of medication, you can't get medication that's safer and more effective than this class of medications. I mean, the only other class of medications that are as safe as... I'm absolutely would want anybody to have access to it, and to have all the knowledge that they need to kind of dispel their worries, or to kind of be educated about what it is. What the drugs do, but I suppose I'm still resistant. I'm still on the fence about how of the different ways, because it's still an early journey. I have not, while I was diagnosed a number of years ago, I chose to not take medication just because I think being naive about it, not as wasn't given necessarily the best advice and guidance on it. And so at the time I thought, and I saw a documentary, actually Roy Bremner did a good documentary about ADHD a while back now, the comedian. And I think, like him, he said, I think he was worried. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but or he can say this isn't true, but I seem to remember him saying, like, if I take these pills, I somehow thought, which is ridiculous now that I have taken them, and I know it's not, I'd stop being me. Yes, that's
He wrote that. He was Tim Lott in The Guardian said that he was diagnosed. He wrote the family column in The Guardian. I don't know if you read his, and he wrote the family column. And suddenly one day I read about, he said as well that, my marriage is over. I've been in the family column, but I've been diagnosed with ADHD. And he said, I've been given these pills, but I worry that will I no longer have that, even though you don't like that berating voice in your head, but it's often the voice, the creative voice as well, that might.
Absolutely, yes.
And I was worried that I would no longer have that voice. So I think I worried for 8 years without taking medication. I mean, literally, all those years I did the CBT, I did meditation, which I have to say is brilliant. It remains brilliant. Transcendental meditation for me.
Yeah.
And being able to actually do that and to actually create a space away from, we're taking the noise out of my head and resetting myself that day. That personally works for me. I'm not saying it works for you, but that and CBT work for me. But then I took the drugs and I was just like, oh my God, I'm still bloody crazy in terms of, I mean that in the nicest possible way. I still have my
me, that's right.
Me in terms of, I make connections, and this is the positive things about ADHD. I think the 3 qualities that I suppose the positives are the superpowers that it sounds really cringy that there's.
No, but it's a very common theme. Everybody's got ADHD, talks about it.
God knows we've got to big ourselves up because we've criticised so much Risto. But my work as a filmmaker and as a storyteller. The gift I think that definitely my ADHD, the way that my mind works, has allows me to join the dots, to see things, put things together that other people wouldn't. I see things as other people wouldn't, and that is, I'm really proud of that, and I've learned to be proud of that. And I do think that that is a real gift to, and I make connections, I think, because that quality with the creativity, being able to tell a story, to have tenacity, and that comes in really useful in my job, in journalism, like going for something, to being determined. I can hyper focus, that ADHD hyper focus when you go into something that you love and you're totally given over to that subject, or you're absorbed in it. It means that I can definitely, I would determine to make something, to make a film or to tell a story. And then empathy, because I can empathize with people, the stories I've chosen to tell. I feel great empathy for people who've gone through, hardships. God knows, this is not a sob story. I'm bloody lucky and fortunate, but because I have felt vulnerability in myself, I can relate to that in other people, and people open up to you in a way. But
as you said, none of those qualities are taken away from you.
But
not taken away from you.
I started to take to roundabout way, and this is the kind of ADHD chat that you're going, you have a conversation with people with ADHD and like, where are they going? And then you're coming back to the point, and do eventually. But the going back to medication is like, I thought that would just kill that. I thought it would, like, I'd heard, when you take, I just heard about I'd never had depression until it showed itself in that way, when I was diagnosed. But prior to that, I thought, when people talk about taking antidepressants, there's numbness, or it just numbs you out and you don't feel anything. I thought, and then it was a friend, a lovely friend, a mentor to me at a work, a brilliant filmmaker and storyteller, writer, and she's a yoga. I thought she's like a totally natural, organic, vegan, and I told her about my reservation about taking the medication. You mad? It's something that if you have diabetes, you take.
Exactly.
Crazy. Why wouldn't you do that? And I had never thought about it. I was like, I'd never take, I don't want to take drugs. I was so anti anything that was, and especially it is hard, we should say, with the medication, to get your head around the idea that you are taking it effectively. It's confusing. It seems counterintuitive for someone with a brain that is whirring all the time.
It takes speed. That's right.
And even everybody says to me,
totally counterintuitive.
They're like,
try and make a point about the medication, because I think it is a really important issue and it's central in many people's experience in life.
Yeah.
So let's dwell on it. So my understanding, the way I try and explain this form of medication to people, it's very fast acting, it's time limited, and it's a bit like like me, I need these things to read. I put them on and I can read, and then I can take them off, and I'm not bothered if I can't read because I'm not wanting to read. And so most of the time I don't have these on, they're just reading glasses. If I put them on, I can see the screen, I can see you, which is a bonus. If I take them off, it all gets a bit blurry. But being a bit blurry is all right most of the time because I don't need the facility of seeing words or sort of reading things on a screen, etc. And it doesn't matter. And the medication for ADHD is very similar to that. You
Yes,
take it
but yes,
when you're involved in tests that you need to do that require that sort of focus, right?
However, I would say as a caveat to that, because I do understand, like you can come off it for periods of time if you don't, like, for example, you're on holiday, because one thing that I find is what it does to how I describe it when I take it is because it seems strange again that you're taking speed now with a brain such as an ADHD brain, right? It takes a lot for us to get excited by the mundane, to literally do boring, mind-numbing shit, household chores, right? So we need that to get that fit, it's harder to get that, that dopamine fix to get, to get excited. So when I take it, it allows me to do those. It literally will get me excited by taking the speed. It's getting me excited enough, engaged, those neurotransmitters buzzing around. Am I right? Correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the psychotherapist, but that's getting my brain excited enough to do that terrible stuff, the boring stuff.
You've got a classic ADHD way of describing it, because it's all about stimulation and excitement.
Stimulation, excitement, right? So I get that. And then when, but it keeps, so it kind of is almost like everything is halation. Yeah, as you say, there's a halation around, it's a bit fuzzy, and then it comes into sharp focus. So once, after taking it, it will just be like this list of boom, 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 you've got to get that done, got to nail those things, and you've got to do it. And it literally gives you the energy in your brain, or the kind of the focus to start something and finish it.
Exactly.
That you don't want to do. The other things that can still, so it gives you that. However, when you're on it, like I will use, so on holiday, or when I'm having a down week, if I'm not, wanting to be on it all the time and focused, I can't turn it down. So I wouldn't be able to have like a little nap or just like.
No, I mean, it's time released during the day. So there are limitations to it. And I suspect at some point they'll come up with other ways of taking it to allow you to do it short.
Saying in terms of you can take it for a child going to school, helping them to get through, just going through the day, and then
it's generally about 8 hours. So it lasts for about 8 hours. It's time release. It can't be abused. It's non-toxic, and it doesn't form any form of physical or psychological dependencies. It's a really interesting medication.
So I've chosen now. I've taken that, and it's worked for me. That stimulant has worked for me. I know that there are other things out on the market that people are, if they don't want to, I've been hearing about this recently, about this lion something.
There's a variety of non-stimulant based ones, but they're not as effective.
Which is a mushroom powder, an illegal mushroom here that is able to
slibin. Let's not go into that conversation. As interesting as it is, I'm just going to say to anybody who's listening to this, it's not licensed in the UK. There's very little evidence it's effective. Stick with the types of medications that are licensed. So there's two main medications for ADHD. One is stimulant based and one is non-stimulant based. The one that's non-stimulant based is good for people where stimulants are contraindicated. It's slightly less effective, and it doesn't give you as much freedom. It has more of it's more intrusive. And I think the advantage of the stimulant-based ones is you take them in the morning, they're finished 8 hours later, and then you can, like, the next day you'd have to take it again to get another hit of it, and there's no lag in them in that sense, so they're quite effective. But the other medications that you're talking about, I would caution people against.
The legal one is lion. Yeah, it's a different one. Lion's Mane, and it's a one that you can buy in Nature's Planet Organic. Anyway, I'm just saying there are different ways of for people, you know, if they don't want, but in terms of a straightforward medication, proved.
My experience is this. I'm without a doubt, Mike. I've been in this game 26 years now, so probably longer than you've been alive, Kate, by the looks of you. I can say without doubt, every single time a child's been brought to me and the parents have been convinced to take the medication, that child's life has transformed.
Yeah.
But
well,
yeah, so every single time it's the same.
And the thing I would say is, as an adult, because I don't know experience of taking medication as a child, but as an adult, I will say that I think it hand in hand with, I don't think on its own, I think for maybe children being handheld, but I think but with cognitive behavioral therapy and with
there's a stool that has various legs, and if you take a leg away, the stool is unstable. So it's one of
there's different things, and whatever things work for differently. But I get absolutely what you're saying about the medication.
Militant about it, Kate, you may have noticed, but that's because I'm fed up of having 40-year-olds coming to my practice who are wanting to kill themselves because they've not been diagnosed, and they've ended up getting ridiculous diagnoses like personality disorders or.
No, I think that is true. It's shocking about. I mean, I'm reading is that 1 in 4 women who have been diagnosed with ADHD have attempted suicide, and
loads, absolutely.
And I think that is really shocking. And then the other thing,
you go to any 12-step meeting like Alcoholics Anonymous or anything like that, there's a whole bunch of people in the corner that can't seem to quite get it right, can't get the program, can't get sober, whatever it is, and every single one of them has undiagnosed ADHD. That's the truth here. It's devastating to people's lives not to have these options and choices, which is what I think the diagnosis gave you. It's like suddenly it's like here's a reasonable explanation of what's going on, and here are the options. Make a decision about what you want to do about them. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I think it was absolutely life changing, and I think that and I feel very, very angry about. I do feel really, really angry about this, the gender bias in diagnosis.
Let's also talk about that a bit because, I think that's important.
I understand, that how much less likely you are to be diagnosed if you're Black or Asian, ethnic minorities, and that is, the statistics are really shocking on that, and the fact that 40%. One estimates of the prison population is estimated to have undiagnosed ADHD.
Yeah, I totally believe that.
That makes me like there's a rage that and I there was something really shocking when I found out about my maternal, both my grandmothers had been who were comfortable middle class inverted commas lives, and they had both been done for shoplifting. I mean, and got managed to get off or whatever. It was like cries for help or whatever, however you want to kind of put it. But then I found out that after my own diagnosis, I related to it. So I was shocked, but I just thought, wow, if they hadn't been protected, not everyone, their lives could have been very different. It was like sliding doors moments. And I think the same with myself. I think your impulsivity.
Yeah.
So the impulsivity as a child to the common things. I think it's really interesting to talk about what happens with children. So it's not just the hyperactivity can manifest itself. You can be hyper. That manifests itself with the hyperactivity, though. I think people think of that as being the boys, it's the boys jumping up and down. But I had the jiggling of the leg because you're trying to the twirling of the hair in class or the biting of the nails. I'd have to sit on my hands and plead because there's that whole thing about being a girl and pleasing and societal kind of like pressure to be a good little girl. It was all right for me. I saw these boys and I looked at them. I remember just looking at these boys across the playground and seeing in them. I identified there was something we're the same but we were different. And I would just have to kind of it's like a kinetic energy, like a wind up coil, because it's all suppressed, one of those, like a jack in a box.
Exactly.
And we just had it whirring. It's like hyperactivity, whirring mind and thoughts, right? So because they're coming so quickly, these thoughts, you're making these connections, which is wonderful if you're an entrepreneur, if you're what's his name, Bill Gates, or has ADHD, or you're Richard Branson, dyslexia and ADHD, you can call the shots, and you're done, I want to do this, and you can delegate all the stuff, which I'm very good at. Like, I can have all the big ideas and you can get it delegated. But if you're a child and that's all going on, and you don't have a filter, you say things, right? You blurt things out unfiltered, and in the playground that can lead into scrapes for the boys. You don't impulsively, that's why so many males in prison who have been undiagnosed they've reacted. They're not premeditated. The people, the undiagnosed, many men, I'm sure, women that are on those prison sentences that they've got are, shoplifting, drugs, crimes that are not like these clever, fraud, masterminding, whatever. They are not high collar kind of crime. They're reactive. It's because they haven't been able to control their emotions. So in a fight, it's resorted to, they punch, this anger.
And then you have also this oppositional defiance stuff, which builds up because you're getting unfair messages from authority.
Unfair messages. So that leads me on to I hope, a segue into relationships, right? So it covers like how it affects everything of your life. Now, because you are hearing constantly the negative, don't leave the butter out on the things, it's going to melt. Don't leave your teacup with the 2 tea bags out, don't let the kettle boil. You're constantly getting these negative messages. So you are just, you get to boiling point of like, what else can I fucking do wrong,
Yeah.
And so it's anger. And in relationships, there is a that manifests itself, obviously. So it can be at work, in the workplace, in relationships, marriage. I mean, whether you're married or with your partner, anybody you share a home with, flatmates, and it can flare up, and I know it's an anger that's boiling inside you, and I experience that, very clearly, and I can see that if I wasn't aware of, if I didn't have those strategies in place, or to calm myself down, or to think, they're not really the other thing is that coming with there's something that's been identified, which you'll be, I'm sure, an expert on, but the sensitivity dysphoria, sensitive dysphoria, right? So this conditional, this kind of how you are incredibly sensitive to criticism. So it's especially, so that makes it even worse because you're getting criticized the whole time. But with particularly people with ADHD, you feel like you want to crawl into a hole when you are criticized, and then that's because of that very extreme reaction. Partners or women will think, oh my God, you're a nutter. You're just told, you nutter. And then you're like, oh my God, I am a nutter, So it feeds, it's this self-perpetuating thing, where you're kind of 1 minute like a cage, like a rabbit in the headlights, feeling, oh, I'm hot and I just want to cuddle. And then the next minute you're angry because you feel you're wronged. You feel like nobody gets me, nobody understands what's going on in my mind.
That emotional ability, that sort of extreme things are very confusing for people. It's okay, it's sort of cute in a child, but then you put in an adult and it's less cute, isn't it? Particularly if you
don't have those, if you don't have those parameters, if you haven't got things in place. Listen, I had, fantastic education. I was told, it didn't affect my IQ. My IQ was pretty okay. I was very, bright, but I had parents that allowed me to find something that I thrived at. Okay. So I found, even because people will think, like, oh, what's she talking about? And she became a filmmaker and all of that, and she's been successful. Well, on obviously the trappings of success that I did, that I managed to accumulate with, married, baby, had these films, articles written. That came with a massive support network,
Yes,
and they, because they allowed me, they were totally helped me find the thing that I could thrive at, even though they didn't know, it was never diagnosed, ADHD had not been diagnosed. They didn't even know what my school, where I was at, they had no idea what those 4 letters stood for. It was never discussed. So but they realized that when I spoke languages, when I started studying languages, that, and there is now all these studies about how language, music, and how they, especially with putting together another sentence structures in another language, like rearranging, the unjumbling of verbs, adjectives. My brain was so fired up and excited by that, because it's like, you're on a drug. It's like you're having to think. I had to engage, be in the moment, and because I had to think about what I was going to say next and jumble. So it was kind of like a drug. So I was thrived doing that, and I was up and flying, and it helped with my filmmaking. I loved telling a story and doing that. But preparing for exams, or was absolutely, or writing essays. I mean, I remember even getting, I got in to do a master's at university, and I was thinking, my whole experience of university was just, I thought, why everybody's having such a brilliant time, and I'm in this, I'm sitting here spending 50 hours to, even I've got all the ideas for the essay. I used to sit there like cutting and pasting. It was like I dream about, the paragraphs, like cutting and pasting. I still, even now, I let you think about when I write something of, wow, how to get the structure of it. And I do it. And I do it, I know I can do it to a really good level, and I get it done. But it is so much more of an effort to do it than I can see the average person. And
I guess the point is, for me as well, is that it's not that ADHD is a death sentence or anything like that, but you were, you had a facilitating environment around you, and you were able to grow to your strengths.
I do think that it breaks my heart. But
that's not the truth for every human being, and in fact, for a lot of people, it's nowhere close to the truth.
And that's absolutely, and that's what has to change in the school system. Because I think,
and you know what, Kate, just because you haven't gone out and ended up in Holloway prison doesn't mean you don't have a useful voice.
It doesn't mean you won't.
All right, it's okay. I said to you before that I think there's a need for articulation in all these areas of human experience, and I guarantee that there'll be people with ADHD listening to this. Maybe not tonight, but another time, they'll be going, "Oh God, thank God, somebody's putting into words my experience." And Kate, that's such an important skill that you've got, that you can be you with ADHD, clearly with ADHD, for anybody who's worked in the field, and articulate these experiences so well. And ode to people, actually.
I think I feel a real duty to do that, and I feel really
some of that early programming in you, because you're in this conversation, you're putting yourself down, saying I shouldn't be this, and I'm like thinking, no, that's the kid at school being told off. Not
I know that I'm really proud of how of the way that of how those traits, how I put things to good use. And I know that I've become a storyteller that I am because very nature, because of the way that my brain functions. I see it as wired, but I do think that there is so much, in schools, if it was identified so much earlier, if general practitioners were aware of this, and giving away like a basic, like the leaflet of going, I think it might be this. They can't say, I know they can't, but they could think it could be. They could just give that material away, that it was ready, it would be handed out, ready.
Yeah. And also we could think about education, like with my son, as you know, he has ADHD, and we chose a teaching methodology called IB, which is a French system, International Baccalaureate, which is group-based and kinetic. So he doesn't have to sit on his hands and spend all of his intellectual energy on not getting into trouble, which is what you described. You spent the whole of your school like going, right, I can't get into trouble, I can't do this. I mean, like, how on earth do we expect a child who's focused 100% on not getting into trouble to do any learning? It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, you're so self-centered, you're so worried about it, you're kind of, you're in the grip of like anxiety.
So there are teaching strategies and methods, like the IB is a classic one, which is group and kinetic based. And also in his school, they're aware that he has this kinetic energy that he can't do anything about. So he has the right in his school to go to his teacher and say, I need to go and see X teacher. And the X teacher is the boss who can say, right, okay, off you go for a run.
But you've advocated it, and I think
that's what he gets. He gets to go run around the field, and that's all he needs to do.
There's such simple things that could, I think, before, because the process of waiting for a diagnosis can be so long, because it's only a psychiatrist that can, give diagnosis.
That's wrong. It's not true. It's not correct. Shouldn't happen that way. The diagnosis is pretty straightforward. The problem.
But because it can only be that person.
Psychiatrists, I'm going to be shot down by the Royal College of Psychiatrists, but I don't care. It's because they're the ones who are allowed to say what the medication levels are. And that's why psychiatrists are involved, okay? But the actual diagnosis can be done by a psychologist. And
by medication, and but until there is that official diagnosis, the child won't get the extra time to complete the work, won't be given the ability to
let's demand the evidence. That's right.
Breaks. I think I've seen it in my kids' school. I think wow, it's so obvious, the kids, because you've got that radar. You see the kids that have it, that just keep.
It's like
look at them,
signs on their heads, don't they?
Look at them and think, God, if there were simple things while they're waiting, and they're so far off the idea of diagnosis, we've got to wait, on the NHS waiting list, obviously so long, and then if you can pay for that first diagnosis, it's God, do it. It's worth everything to be able to get that. But I think that there's simple things have been put in, just those movement breaks for child, like every half hour. He or she should be get up. We give the books out, fidget strips underneath the desk.
All of that.
And I think so that's why and also one last, I would say, sixth form. I look back to current affairs. What do you call it? Not current affairs. Career advice. Career advice. And being people, instead of channeling people into wishy-washy university degrees or degrees which aren't going to or saying that they should become an accountant or a lawyer. I'm not saying brilliant if you want to be a lawyer, accountant, but if you've got an ADHD brain, maybe not the best thing.
Definitely not a good choice.
There's definitely careers. There's really simple thing of professional kitchens. They say one of the really, really good place because of.
It's a really good choice, actually.
And actually, teaching professions. I mean, I didn't know this, but thinking through it, and actually, because of the performance level of when with ADHD, when you thrive, if you go into this mode of okay, I've got to get this thing done and I've got to perform, and then you can collapse. But it's teachers can
also sales, high pressure sales are really good as well. Really great, ideal. I know some of the wealthiest people I know have ADHD.
Yes, entrepreneurial thing. So
selling stuff
about like that, rather than setting up someone for an absolute bore, because a 9 to 5 real rigid job. You're gonna be absolutely.
Which brings us to a broader issue, and I think this whole issue about neurodiversity and disability and celebrating the positive contribution that these things make, rather than the deficits. And there are specific issues around school, and I labour that point because the damage happens there, and we have to stop damaging children at school who have this condition, right? We just have to stop doing it. I'm not tolerant of any excuses at all. It just has to stop. Okay? We have to be decent to our children. We have to give them the best start in life. I'm not going to compromise on that. And I'm not tolerating excuses from anybody on that one.
Yeah, I agree.
Put your finger out, get the job done around kids with ADHD. But this neurodiversity, I mean, it's like I told you, like with my boy, for example, there'll be days when he takes his meds and goes in school, and there's a version of him that I love on those days. But there's a version of him without the medication, which I also treasure. That energy, that excitement, that creativity. There's magic. He's like a little pixie that magically creates stuff from, I don't know where from, but it's wonderful to see, and he's got.
You don't want to be breaking that, no. Breaking that spirit, but I do think that, and that's where then, I think there is so much, talk about neuroinclusivity and neurodiversity, but now it's like really into action, and putting that into action, and you know, and I know there are certain organizations, companies that really do, you know, walk the walk and not just talking talk about things. And I think that is fantastic. I know, and I think very similar organizations that also work with reformed, you know, prisoners. And it's all that second chance. And I think it's not just, you know, ADHD, as you say, it's like definitely with autism and jobs that being that flexibility of, you know, the working hours and working environments, noise cancelling headphones, and being able to use that without being, you know, say a weirdo in the corner, you know. So I think that we are moving. I think it is exciting, but there's a long way to go. And I really think it should start in schools, because the other thing we haven't touched on is this brilliant professor, Amanda Kirby, who works with the ADHD Foundation, and she has a very neurodiverse family, and she's absolutely passionate about changing, you know, neurodiversity in the workplace. But she says in schools, it's about every child has the right, you know, to, you know, numeracy, literacy, you know, work, but money, knowing how to manage money is a very big factor of Claire Steele. It was wrote that brilliant book, My Frugal Year, you know, who has ADHD, and about how this, you know, that's a very a key thing about why those people end up in prisons, or, you know, committing those crimes, is very often because not just they are, you know, vulnerable, yes, or, you know, doing something for somebody else, but it's because, you know, committing a crime for somebody else, but it's because they might be got into debt, they haven't managed their money well, and they've stolen. And that is because you know, with an ADHD brain as well, like managing money, planning for the future, it's so obvious that is a thing. And so if children leave school being at the basics of it, they really budgeting is really important, because that's a life skill, you know.
Absolutely. And there's a deep failure that goes on. You've navigated through this, and you're at this point where you're a wonderful advocate, and you've written this book.
Not a book. I've written the article.
Written the article. Sorry.
Working on a book, but I haven't. Yeah, but
you're working on a book. What else are you working on? And are you like available? Can people contact you and say, could you come and have a chat with us? Or, you know, if an organisation wanted to get hold of you, I mean, do you do that sort of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I direct people to, you know, to contact me through my Instagram account, and I absolutely would.
Your Instagram account?
It's Kate Horne Storyteller.
Kate Horne Storyteller. So James, who's in the background somewhere, will make sure that we send out.
The process of getting notes up on as well, the links to anything we might have discussed, or anywhere I can direct them. But I definitely feel if it's helpful to come and talk to, you know, whether it be, you know, in schools or in the workplace, where people feel like, you know, that they're maybe somebody who has, you know, there must be a wide variety of people, whether it be parents who feel that, you know, other parents of children with ADHD who really don't feel that they're getting any support and would love to know how to manage it in the you know, in the home or in the classroom, teachers, you know, definitely I'm looking into, I really want to use my voice and my experience.
What you have to offer, as opposed to something like me, because I could go and do, you know, clinical stuff and diagnosis, but actually, and this is, remember I said this to you in the telephone conversation we had before the show, was I want you to come and be you, because what will happen is people who are undiagnosed will look at how you communicate and go, oh, that's me. Mm-hmm. And then we'll go and get the diagnosis, because they go, that's that, I'm just like her. And that's what I would advocate for, is that people get you to come in and be you, talk about your experiences, because there'll be people sitting in that audience who have not been diagnosed and need the diagnosis, and they will see themselves in you and will go,
well, I suppose see their children, you know, their child, their daughter, of, you know, and see, oh, that's what it is, that's why she's acting, you know.
But when, you know, like when you do things like you talk about how I sat on my hands, there'll be little girls listening to that going, that's what I'm doing, oh, that's me.
And I think the anger as well was really interesting. I've been looking, you know, Mel B of the Spice Girls, who's probably like the last person you imagine, like, okay, ADHD because she's so confident. And she said I was called Scary Spice because I was bloody angry because I'd been I had terrible dyslexia at school, never died dyspraxia. Couldn't remember my lines for the song or what I was doing, and and I was was leery because I couldn't articulate what was going on. You're angry when you can't articulate what's going on in your brain and you feel alone, so I hope that this helps for people with
without doubt. I mean, it's sort of it's wonderful to have you on. We have to finish, as you know, and I did explain to you an hour would go very quickly, far too quickly than one imagines. So get hold of Kate through her Instagram, Kate Horne Storyteller, and get her in to chat with your organisations would be my advice. It's really, really wonderful to have you on. We've only covered a fraction of your story. I mean, we didn't really go into the stuff around relationships, and I was aware that this is the first time you're telling a story, so I didn't want to leave you too vulnerable. So, but maybe you'll come back again.
Yes, I'll be sharing as well, definitely ways, the strategies and books and tools that have been really good for me. So
maybe come back and do some of that slightly more relaxed and in-depth work, and maybe more vulnerable work that sort of didn't seem appropriate this time, because I think it was just really important for you to be yourself and for people to be able to identify with it and maybe get the confidence to go and ask for help. And I can't stress enough, if anybody's been listening to this and thinks she's just like me and nobody's told you that you have ADHD, go and find somebody to talk to about it, because it can transform your life, can it not, Kate, getting that diagnosis? So
brilliant. Thank you very much for letting this, allowing us the space.
You stay there. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, and we have a guest on next week who's going to talk about gambling and his experience of gambling, who I had to put off before over the summer. But I'm really excited to have like Kate, because it's a really interesting, important topic that's much under discussed. The gambling and how it's leading to severe problems for people is also a topic that's not discussed enough. So that'd be great to join us next week. I'm going to say goodbye for now, and I hope you all have a great week in between. Bye-bye.